Hello, this is my 8th video in my writing process playlist, and today I'm going to talk about my protagonist. This is the ideation phase of the protagonist, but what I want to do first is I want to ask this question: what role do they play in the story? Well, in my story, they are the eyes into this world. The story is going to be set in the future. I would not call it futuristic. I would call it more of like a new dark age kind of vibe. There are going to be many differences than our world now. So I'm going to use my protagonist as the way into this world. So it's very important that he is kind of on like an unknown point of view, like he just doesn't know what's going on. And I don't want to give too much away about that, or why he is like that, but I have to have that in the back of my head when I'm creating him, because I have to think, well, what does he know? What does he not know? So I think when you're creating any protagonist, you have to think about what archetype fits this person. In my case, I went into tarot. I went through and I found the card that I think fits him best, and that is the Hanged Man. And I'll get to that a little bit more in a bit, but the archetype of the Hanged Man is kind of a person who is stuck, or a person that needs to sacrifice something to move on. I need to know that at the beginning, because every choice I make about the character comes from that archetype. But with that said, you also need to think that every character, there should be a goal, something that they're working towards. Now, you can find this in different ways, and I'll talk about it more in a second. But the first thing to remember when you're talking about a character is that there's an internal and an external side to them. So the internal part is the feelings, thoughts, emotions of the character. The external are their actions in the story, their relationships to other people, and the dialogues they have with them. Now, when you are creating a character, I think you need to be thinking about all of these things. If you don't focus completely on all these things, then the character is going to seem flat. You need to address all 6 of these details to make the character well-rounded. The other thing that is very important, and especially for a protagonist, but I think really for any character, is that they are sympathetic, that they have vulnerabilities, but then they also have virtues. And I think this even applies to your antagonists as well. So keeping those things in mind, in my story, I want to take a trope, and my trope is the kind of noir, beaten down protagonist. If you've seen any film noir or read any noir, he's kind of a lost soul. He's morally defective in some way. They're kind of like an anti-hero. Like many noirs, he starts in a bad place and things will get worse and worse. And I find that kind of fascinating, and that's one reason why I'm starting my character from this point of view. Is I want to highlight his flaws. I want to give him a unique voice within his flaws. So I'm actually going to write this novel as a first-person narrative, so it's from his point of view. When you think about this sort of noir detective, in my story, he's not exactly a detective. Regardless, that kind of idea is a stereotype, and you don't really want to have a stereotype. You want it to be something alive and different. So starting from that stereotype, I'm going to make choices in the character development when I'm building it to subvert those choices. My protagonist is going to be in a state of amnesia for a second. And I know that sounds cliche as well, but the reason I'm doing it this way is because I want this story to be about anamnesis. You can look that up on the internet. I'm not going to get deeply into it here. I do have a video on it here if you want to learn anything about it. But the story is about him sorting through his life now, but also sorting through other lives that he's had. Remembering these sort of past lives. It's going to go from some dreams to these visions of these different times. So right there, I think that kind of subverts the trope a little bit. It's going to be a little complicated in that way, so I have to be very careful at the beginning of how I construct this character. Probably more than any of the other characters in the book. To do it, I had to create, first of all, a mind map. And this is a mind map of his past lives. I blacked out the details so I could make this pretty much spoiler free, but as you can see, there are several branches that come out from the main branch. Each one is set in a different time in history, and he has a completely different life in these times. That doesn't mean all of these times are going to have their own story arcs, but all of them will play a part in some way in the construction of my plot. A lot of the major revelations of the story are going to take place in these different times. Then I started thinking, well, before I could get into the details of the character, I have to think a bit about his backstory in the present. Who is he? Like, how did he get there? And a lot of this is just for my own purposes. Even if it doesn't make it into the story, I think it helps me wrap my head around who this person is, and it also sets up his goal and his motivations of why he is where he is, and also why at the beginning of this story he's in such a bad place, because like I said previously, in a noir, the protagonist is usually pretty down on his luck. In many noirs, the opening scene he's actually dying, or having, a double cross, or something bad is happening. Well, in my case, it's not going to be that different, but I need to figure all that out before I can actually get to that place. I did all that, and then I went in to this program called the Novel Factory. I'm mainly using this just for my characters, to be honest. I like a lot of the other functions in here. However, I also like Scrivener, and I just find it easier to use that for most of my plot structure and stuff. But I do think it's worth checking this out for the character questionnaire. I start my characters with some images, and it actually takes me a long time to find images that work for what I'm looking for. And in the case of my protagonist, this is Guy Pearce from the film The Proposition, and he's kind of beaten down. I just think he fits what I'm looking for well. And now when I'm writing, I'm not gonna just copy the way that he looks, but I think it's important to have some inspiration. Let me scroll down real quick. You can see I have more pictures of what I intend him to look like, because this is in a sort of dark ages in the future, so there's this kind of Old West kind of vibe, I guess, to a degree. I have two of the other characters here. These are the main two female characters that I will get to in the next video, but I also found pictures for them, and I'll explain more about that when it comes time to do their video. But right now, I'm just going to go into the sample character so I don't spoil anything. So if you look in here, it has all of the basic details. You can create your gallery here, and there's character viewpoint, description. If you click on this, it lets you type in and save your descriptions. Now, what I come here for isn't all that stuff. What I come for are these cells down here, and the first one is characterization, and I will go through and I will answer these questions, and it takes a long time, but it really helps me to get to know my character. And usually where I begin is with personality types. So if you click on this, that's this cell here is the personality type. Now, I find it easier to use an enneagram and then kind of go off from that. So, like I said before, I will use a tarot card to start it, which I have a spot down here. I had to add this to it. You can actually add your own questions in, down here where it says new question and answer. But I have tarot card slot, and that's sort of my initial inspiration. But then when I get to the actual personality type, I use the enneagram. So this character is an Enneagram type 5, the investigator, and he's also got a wing, which is 5W4, which is the iconoclast. Now, that sounds like gibberish, but if you look into it, there are 9 different kinds of personality types, and they are all supposed to be all kinds of people, basically, have one part of this, and these different wings. And then there is a voice section, which I think is pretty cool. Personality part is very important. Is he an optimist or a pessimist? Is he introverted or extroverted? All of these questions are very, very useful. I highly recommend this program just for this part. Now, you could go and find all this on the internet in a billion other places, but it's so useful to have it in one spot. Physical appearance, all important stuff. Now, some of the things I did not include. I will go through all of this, all the rest of it, and I try to fill out as much as I can. Spirituality, values, miscellaneous, a bunch of things. But anyway, I think this is very useful. If you haven't used it before, they have a 30-day free trial, so I suggest that you try it out at least once. And the link to the Novel Factory is in the description. So I want to get back to the tarot archetype for a second before I finish this video. So after I have my personality type, going back into the tarot is interesting because then you can kind of align these things. And I definitely think it makes for a more compelling character. Because the world is full of symbols, and if you know how to use the symbols, I think you can subliminally use them in your story. In the case of my character, the Hanged Man, that's his archetype, his thing is all about internal conflict. So through this whole story, he's going to be struggling with himself, fighting himself, really. And not just himself in the present, but himself in many different timelines. So I want to really hit home this idea of like try and fail. And I think having these cycles is very important for not only a main character, but any character. If they're not failing, then there's no drama, there's no conflict. So they need to fail. And the main symbol in the Hanged Man is this kind of tragic flaw, which means that they're incapable of change. And I think that's something that we all struggle with as people. And I think to include that element into your protagonist, I think you're already kind of steps ahead, because people will identify, this person sticking to their type, their personality type, even if everything around them is falling apart. They're just kind of plowing through it, trying to get to their goal, and most likely they might not even make it to their goal because their own personality is working against them. And I find that very fascinating, and it's something I definitely want to explore in this book. I read a lot of books, and I think some people are just thinking about the plot and how to get from point A to point B, but it's the revealing moments in books, it's the moments where you actually peer into their humanity that I think actually resonates with people. So it's important to have those, even if it's just a small section. If you don't have that, I think you're missing something. And then it just becomes kind of a hollow story. It's not really character driven, it's just plot driven, and that's kind of boring. The last thing I'm going to say is that in order to make this character and my secondary characters, which I'm going to talk about in my next video, I had to make a map of the world that I'm going to put these people in. And I'm going to do a whole video about making maps, but that will be in the outlining phase. But I had to do it a bit prematurely because I didn't really know logistically where these people were from, or how they could come together based upon the geography. So I'm just mentioning that now. I will talk about it more in a later video. But that's all I got for today. If any of this benefited you, you can like and subscribe. If you know someone that might want to take a look at this, you can send it to them. I would appreciate that. You can also check out my writing tips if you want to learn more about writing. And yeah, that's about it. That's all I got. Take care. Have a good day.